All right. I think we're live.
All right, let's go.
Dope. Okay. Hey, man. Good to see you.
What's up, boss man? How you doing? Glad to see you again.
Yeah, we're back at it. It's been a few weeks, but let's just get right into it. So I don't exactly know where I'm gonna go with this these first few minutes, but I thought maybe I could just share a few ideas that I've been playing with, try to arrange them under a story or an example, and then see where it goes from there. So for me, the easiest part or the easiest way to start is to just give a fact that I feel like is undisputable or indisputable. Reality contains way more information than human beings can attend to at once.
Agreed.
Given that we are inherently limited in that manner, in order for us to act and perceive in the world, we have to first select a set of information that we are going to contend with. And whenever you start talking about selecting anything over something else, you're talking about priorities and you're talking about values. Another way you can think of this is you need a frame of reference that helps you organize what information you care about that's important to you before you can actually act and perceive in the world. Okay. What I've been trying to do is I've been trying to relate all of that to meaning. I think that when the common person, lay people, talk about meaning, it's often associated with purpose and intention. And I think it's also associated with positivity. I think when people discuss meaninglessness or purposelessness or lack of meaning and purpose, it's often in a negative guise. And so I think that people associate meaning with, I guess, active engagement with the world, with hope, with knowing what to do. And part of what I'm discovering is that there's a broader definition of meaning that encompasses both positive and negative emotion. And that definition is something like knowledge for action. Your life has meaning when you know how to act. Your relationship has meaning when it orients you in the world so that way you know how to behave. Your rituals, something we've spoken about before, your social institutions, the church that you go to, your religious beliefs, these things give you meaning because they help you deal with your limitations by giving you a frame of reference that organizes how you're supposed to attend to the world so that way you can perceive it and so that way you can act in it. I'm actually going to pause there to see if you have any input.
I love the point that you're bringing up because to me, this sits on two big things that I talk about a lot. One, the ego is necessary because the ego is this frame of reference, and but I think that when two things happen, one, we forget that we build our own egos, and two, we don't build an ego that has a foundation that we can have faith in. So, what am I saying here? That what you're talking about here is an establishing idea of meaning or establishing an egoic perception of yourself or something that surrounds you that gives it value and structure, right? And so what I like to do is tell people like if you don't believe anything, if you don't believe in anything, you'll fall. If you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. And the solution I give people to that quote is that you have to build foundation for your ego to sit on. So you need to build four pillars of things, four truths that you agree with in life that build out your moral code and identify where you sit in this hierarchy, right? So it's really more about constructing your ego in a position that gives you power rather than one that makes you feel like a victim to the society and the world you live in. And this is where we talk about with meaning, it's right. Because what you believe about yourself determines your values and morals and how you understand the environment around you. And I'll let you think on that and see how we can build from there.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is the what foundational structure of the frame of reference. You're you called it an egoic frame of reference, and that also stuck out to me. But I'm gonna put that to the side for a second. Would we align that the foundational structure of the frame of reference is the individual's sacred beliefs? Essentially, that's the sacred
You
component
could
to
call
it.
it culture, religion, whichever one you choose to fit in that block. But how you define your ego is built upon the culture, religion, or perception of self that you give it. So, like, whether you're basing off your occupation, your religion, or your culture, that determines the stereotypes that you think are available to you when building your ego. The based off of the label that you put the ego inside of, it determines the lens that it's perceiving the world in. So like if you view yourself as an engineer, you only view yourself in a way that engineers let you view it. If you view yourself as a Black American, an African American, you can only view the world from the lens of an African American or a Christian or whatever is the most important label that you put on yourself. Some people it's just their name and the etymology of their name and what they believe that means. It's whatever you choose to give the most power in your construction of your egoic self.
And when you are using this term egoic, is that referencing essentially the fact that a frame of reference is not disembodied and it's not something that is merely abstract, but it's referring to your perspective, like where an individual has a frame of reference that gives them meaning or that helps them construct meaning in the world, but it's also their idiosyncratic perspective. Is that why you're using the term egoic?
I put it this way. So for me, I believe the ego is a list of your attachments. What do you attach yourself to? Whether it's a name, occupation, an emotion, this is your ego. So how you believe yourself to be limited is your egoic perception of self, right? So these things, like I could choose to be Demonte from the South, that's 32, that's a great dancer, that is always nervous. That always nervous can limit my perception of what I can do because I assume I'm going to be nervous before I do everything. That's not a truth. That's something that I've chosen to be something that's a part of my mindset. Make sense?
It's a it's a perception.
So yeah, for instance, like that's why I say your egoic perception of self. So this isn't about the actuality of it. These are the things that you think about when you think about you. When somebody asks you who you are, what words do you use? What labels do you use? How do you believe yourself to be viewed? And that perception is the limitation that you put yourself in. That's the meaning that you've given yourself.
Okay, let me pick up on limitation there. Limitation is necessary, but it's also potentially stifling. So all of these things
Yes.
that you just described, you use the word limitation, but even just the labels and the roles, we can imagine that these are all categories that have boundaries that are inherently limited and limiting, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
guessing an example. If you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so for example, when we're talking about this here, like realizing that the limits here are within the framework of the perception of that thing. So, like, for instance, if you are, let me give a good example. If we're talking about, for instance, like we talk about how people, I believe we talked about this before. Some people say, like, oh, that's white people shit. You feel what I'm saying? Now, because you've associated yourself as an African American, these are the things that African Americans don't do that you're limited to. And these are the benefits of being African American that you're not available to. But the actuality is that these lines that you're putting yourself in aren't really there.
Ooh, okay. We could. I think we could have some good back and forth here because one of the things that I would pick you up on is defining terms, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you, or just as an example, the words ego, self, you, reality, beliefs, as you're saying them, I'm transmuting them into my language, and then it doesn't exactly fit. And so I'm trying to see exactly, I'm trying to see where the harmony will be. So let me give you something. There's one archetype of the king. You could say masculinity as well, but across many religious stories and great mythological stories, there's a motif of a king. And the king often represents culture, but at a deeper level, the king and the masculine represents order. It represents form, boundaries, constraints, limitations. And there's a positive and negative aspect to the archetype of the king, where there's the wise king and the evil tyrant. The positive aspects of this archetype are associated with protection, security. I mentioned earlier, I think, that there's a need for limitation because, with my starting premise that there's too much information in the world, you actually need to limit the information that you deal with in order to perceive anything, in order to act, because there's just too much information there. So there's a need for ordering structures. But part of what I'm getting from what you're saying is that there's also the negative element of the archetype of the king, because too much limitation constrains potential growth and creativity and innovation. Now, just one more thing, and then I'll pass it back to you. What's the nature of the reality of these, let's say, social constructions that do limit us? I think that's an interesting question that we might be able to go down as well. Because I would say that the gosh, it's tough. I would say that many of the cultural artifacts that limit us are real to the degree that they offer pragmatic truths.
Okay, so I'll put it this way. So you could, so this goes back into the conversation we were having before about the actuality of yourself and what you perceive it as, right? And so for me, more so what I'm referencing here is this idea that, um, so you have how you perceive yourself, you have what you actually are within the definitions of how you could be defined, and then you have the capacity or potential for what you could be. Imagine these three states, right? And so, in order for you to perceive your actual position currently, you need to be aware of what you actually are. In order for you to get to the potential that you have, you almost have to create a personality that puts you in the middle of where you are and where you want to be, if that makes sense. And so, what I'm saying here is that in order for you to live in the now, you need to be aware of who you actually are now. In order for you to properly build for the future, you need to also be aware of where you actually are now. But you also need to understand the potential that's around you from where you are. And I don't know if that answers your question, if that makes it more confusing.
So are you drawing a distinction between who you actually are now and the egoic perceptions of
Yes.
yourself? Okay, can you unpack that a little bit more for me?
I believe most people have a gap between who they actually are and how they perceive themselves. Why is that? Because what you actually are has more potential than what most people label themselves under. And so these are the limitations I'm talking about. So the limitation comes in when your current self is limited to only something that, for instance, like a job. The occupation is the best example. If you're a janitor, but you have talent as a dancer, you labeling yourself as a janitor is a limited perception. You see what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, that's not your potential talent, but you actually are a janitor. And if you haven't made any actions towards dance and improving your talents or displaying your talents in a way, there's not a door for that reality to materialize, but it's there. So when I say your egoic perception of self, what I'm saying is that a lot of people, because of insecurity or lack of confidence, usually find themselves in positions that are smaller than who they actually are.
Okay. So if I could try to summarize, are you are you arguing that some people unnecessarily limit themselves by conforming their own perceptions of themselves to align with the limiting constructions of culture.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So in
And
short,
yep.
go ahead.
And so you also made the distinction between being and becoming, between actuality and potential. I guess my question is, how are you using the term actual? Because some people say that something is actually there or actually exists, and they are giving it an ontological status. So they're saying when something is actually here, they're saying that's real, and then when they say that something is potentially there, they say that's not real. I'm wondering, are you using actual and potential in that same way, or is actual and potential both equally real in your mind?
So actual is what's physically available within arm's reach, not something that, and so potential is something that you could go do. But it's, you see what I'm saying? Like actual, for instance, like if I'm a janitor, I'm actually sweeping a floor right now. I could potentially record myself dancing, sweeping this floor. You see what I'm saying? So you have the talent or the potential to do more, but the actuality of what you're doing is smaller than that. So, for instance, if you're working at McDonald's and you have aspirations of being a great business person, you're actually a McDonald's worker. You're potentially an entrepreneur.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand it now. Now tell me more about why tell me more about how you think that these cultural constructions limit our potential. And I don't think I disagree with you. I guess I wonder, is it that culture is limiting our potential, or is it that for these subset of people we're speaking of, it's more of a psychological issue, or a combination of both? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe I didn't mean to frame it that you are saying that it's a problem. I don't know if you said it's a problem or not. I think that what I was trying to do earlier with bringing up the positive and negative is to, I guess, see where you were trying to go with that. Like, were you trying to say that culture is limiting us, and something has to be done about that? Or
So,
yeah.
what I was pointing at is the idea of the point you were making about meaning and understanding that, okay, so meaning usually is in some way related to value in culture. So, I feel valuable I feel meaning, I feel like I have meaning in a culture when the culture considers me valuable, right? So the idea here is that in order, the limitations that you feel in meaning or the lack of meaning that some people feel come from a cultural perception of value, meaning that you don't seem valuable in the culture or in the space that you're in because of how they perceive value. You have value because everybody has abundance surrounding them, but your perception of that abundance can be limited by your cultural perceptions, if that explains it a little bit better. And so, what am I saying really? What I'm saying is that if you're in a place that doesn't value art, but you're an amazing artist, you'll never feel like you have meaning. But if you're in a place where art is everything, then you'll feel extremely meaningful because you contribute something. And so, sometimes I believe that we're not properly positioned to see the meaning, and we're not properly positioned because we have a false egoic perception of ourselves, keeping us in environments that don't serve us.
Man, okay. Okay, I think we can unpack that too. Okay, okay. Okay, I'm trying to keep up. Where does value come from if not from culture? Now, I'm not saying value only comes from culture, but I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here.
Well, it comes from your own perception. What do you consider valuable? Because me, cultural is external value, and so this is why self work and self love is a big thing. Because internally, you should have an idea of what you consider valuable, and those things should help help. It should help how you consider what social groups you allow yourselves to be a part of. If that makes sense. So I believe too often we're born into environments, we accept that social standard and that value hierarchy, and but even if we don't agree in it, and if we're not valuable there, we stay there instead of finding somewhere that does or position ourselves in a place that does value us. And a lot of times, I would almost argue this on the spiritual side, that you're born into somewhere that's going to force you to find somewhere that values you.
You are
That's part of
born.
the journey.
So it's a negotiation between other people, right? Let's maybe, in my mind, instead of speaking abstractly about culture and society, it's helpful for me to just say other people, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a dance, it's a negotiation. Maybe also I could try to define what is value. Well, value is a mechanism of allocating something that's limited. And so it's as I in my initial spiel, human beings have limited attention, and the way that you allocate your attention is in accordance with your value hierarchy. And you could say the same thing with time, with money, with energy. Values are the criteria that enable you to allocate limited resources. Maybe that's a way to think of it. And now let me know if maybe you're using value in a different term, in a different way, because I could understand what it means from, again, to go abstractly, a cultural perspective and what culture thinks is valuable or invaluable, or less valuable. And then if I try to make that more concrete by just talking about, well, what do other people value? Well, it's what are other people willing to sacrifice for? What are they willing to give their time, their money, their attention, and their energy towards? And this gets really philosophical, because if we're saying that there's a value hierarchy, and so there's a prioritization list, and there's something at the top. If culture is predicated on, let's say, the ultimate good, and that's the top value hierarchy, then to the degree that an individual is not aligned with that value hierarchy and therefore is deemed invaluable or less valuable by other people, then, well, that's correct in some sense. But if you think that culture is not oriented towards an ultimate good, then you could make the argument that that's why the individual has the freedom, or maybe even the responsibility, to go against the values of other people at times.
I think we talked about this before. Well, first I want to speak about value. So to me, value is the worth of energy, almost. So like most things, whether you talk about money is considered energy, time is energy, attention is energy. All of these things could go into the energy bucket, right? If something is valuable to other people, like you said, this is the thing here. So it's like it's weird just to kind of have this conversation, because value sits in a weird space in our society, because something is only valuable if somebody else is involved. Like you can value something and not necessarily trade it. Like you could say, "Oh, this is my favorite rock," or "This is my lucky jeans," and that doesn't really have value to anybody else, but it has value to you. So that's a sticky spot. But you also think about like cultural or social value, and it's like, hey, I'm valuable because when I talk, people listen. People enjoy my opinion. People feel like my opinion is helpful, so they give me their attention. So their currency there is attention, is the energy they're giving you, and the value they're getting is that you have ideas that help them feel better about themselves. That's a value in exchange there that a lot of people have a hard time understanding. And then you have value where it's like, okay, this thing is useful. And because it's useful, people will exchange time and money to have it. Most of the time, if you're exchanging money, you're exchanging time. You know what I'm saying? And so I think with that, we get into this concept that um it's hard to really define exact value, I guess. I'm kind of losing. What was the second half? I know we got into the value. What was the second half?
Um, I guess, so individuals and societies have value hierarchies. And if it's a hierarchy, that means there's something at the top. And my assertion was that if a culture is oriented towards the ultimate good, and so the top value is the ultimate good, we could talk about what that is. I'm just using that really as a placeholder for now. Well, then, to the degree that an individual is deemed less valuable, then, well, that's the truth. That's correct. But if a society is, let's say, corrupted and aimed at something that's not the ultimate good, maybe even aimed at the ultimate evil, then it's the individual's job to highlight that and to work to make things better. And a big part of that would entail them maintaining their sovereignty, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, okay. So that brings me back to where I was going to get into. So with that point, my thing is, I think we had a conversation where we talked about culture as the survival manual for generations, right? And so to me, when we talk about that, it's not more so about the hierarchy of like the being the greatest good, but it's understanding that these cultural and environmental ideas were put there based off of one particular time that society all agreed that this is the standing truth and we're going to run with that. And then so what you realize is that over time, what's valuable changes, but the culture doesn't change until it has a situation that it requires it to. So I feel like we're at a point in society where we're having cultural value changes, where every culture is being asked whether or not our values need to be updated or whether or not they still stand. So right now we're in a weird place because there's not, like you said, a lot of times there's not an agreed upon value system. It's kind of all over the place for most people, especially if we're talking about on a human scale. Now, if you try to argue small culture, well, even on a cultural level, there's a lot of arguments on what our people should be doing, depending on who your people are, and all of these little conversations. And so, what you realize is that meaning and value is something that's constantly shifting, and it's a collective agreed upon thing of what's valuable and what's not valuable, and it's reassessed constantly throughout microcultures and over large countries, depending on how good communication is and how fast the information can be dissembled. I mean, not dissembled, but disseminated amongst the people.
So I'm reading these books by John Gottman. He's a psychologist on marriage. And one of the things that he discussed is how a marriage can be thought of as a microculture.
Yes.
And it could be helpful, for my sake, to simplify some of the things we're discussing to on a smaller level, and then see if those rules apply as you scale up, right? Now, with the initial axiom that human beings are inherently limited, that means that, like I said, we need frames of reference in order to navigate the world. And those frames of reference are essentially value hierarchies. Here's a thought. Anything that limits the information that you contend with is a pro- proposed solution to how we're supposed to allocate our attention. And so we've been speaking about culture and other people, which is significant. I think it's half the story, because the other half of the story is our bodies and our biology and our physiology. And so the fact that we have evolved over whatever 3.5 billion years, how long life has been around, to have this certain structure, we can notice that it's already limiting. And one way you can conceptualize the limitations of your body is as meaning making, right? So the fact that you can think about your own visual system and how your eye is structured, where you have your retina and your fovea, and there's a very small part at the center of your eye where everything is high resolution. And then as you look out to the periphery, things become more and more blurry, and then obviously you have a limited visual field. And so what does that mean? That means that from the perspective of what evolutionary biology or nature, however you want to call it, you only need to see so much. There's also obviously things that we can't see, right? We can't see heat, we can't see certain colors. There's just things that have been deemed irrelevant for us already, and so all of that to just kind of bring in embodiment as another source of values.
I think what you said is important there because sometimes we forget this, but a lot of times it's easiest to define your meaning by what you aren't than what you are, right? And so I think when I talk about self value and self love, a lot of the times, my biggest thing is figuring out how to get someone to see that the things that you're likely insecure about yourself or the things that you feel like make you different are what gives you value. Like a lot of times in social media, the authenticity, the ability to be yourself, the ability to express yourself authentically is a big thing because it's like your meaning comes. I'll put it this way. So, like on the metaphysical side, I believe that your meaning, you're born with your meaning, your purpose, and your mission. Like you come here, sign the contract to believe, act, and live a certain way. And when you allow yourself to lean into that, there are benefits in the universe reacts positively. When you strick away from the way that you're destined to be, for lack of a better term, and there's a lot more freedom and free will in this than it being a restricted limitation, but there is a frequency or a vibration or a pattern of resonance that a person can be in that allows for them to live what feels like a full life. And you can be choose to either lean into that if you like it, or you can choose to deny it and deal with what comes with that. And I believe that song and dance is what a lot of people grapple with when it comes to meaning because say your spirit likes something that your body don't or doesn't or vice versa. You have to work a little bit harder to maintain that lifestyle depending on different factors.
Yeah, this is why I like to think of meaning as being constantly constructed and negotiated. Although we've been talking about a value hierarchy, maybe there's also a meaning hierarchy where I think that, for example, the archetypes, they represent patterns of meaning construction that are pragmatic for human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but they don't give you the full solution, right? So, like to your point, you mentioned that human beings are born with meaning and their purpose. And I would agree with that to a degree, to the degree that we're born very close to the collective unconscious and are being influenced by it and called forth by it as well. Yeah, I think that that's definitely the case. And then on the other hand, I think that we are also faced with potential and chaos in the unknown. And I think that's why, like you mentioned, we have free will. So that way we can try to bridge the offered solutions for a lack of meaning that have been given to us by the collective unconscious, by our embodiment, by our current culture, with, let's say, our own uniqueness and our own path and our own specific problems that we're going to have to contend with. I think, and we could, I don't know if you want to get into it, but I mentioned how a marriage can be a useful kind of microculture to see how these things play out. But I think that uh, that might be a pragmatic way to try to ground some of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting because, like you said, I, I'm not necessarily married on paper, but I've been with my lady 10 years, and we live together now. And it's interesting how we catch on to the nuances in our relationships that we see on social media from other people that are in the married and long term couple space. You realize that there is this all goes back to ego. Like there's so many different ways that you can find yourself unknowingly attached to a social structure. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of times there's these patterns that appear naturally in life from you either view it two ways. You either like, oh, I'm the only person going through this and you play the victim to it, or you see the culture of people that are communicating about these experiences and how they're a regular part of human life, and you begin to find wholeness in it. And so one thing that I like about the spiritual community and this idea of confirmation is a lot of times there's idea that I realized that we talk about social hierarchies, right? So the idea of exile or being excommunicated from society is a big thing. A lot of people don't want to act in a way that's going to get people to look at them like they're weird. So a lot of people go through these certain emotional battles and situations and things they're going through. It's like, well, oh, I'm the only person going through this. This is where a lot of depression and stuff comes from because they feel isolated in their experience. And so finding a culture that communicates about what you're experiencing can be healthy. But a lot of people will find these cultures and then overly attach to these spaces to the point now where they don't have identity personally. So this is what we're talking about with this cycle, this song and dance here. Is it's okay to have these egoic perceptions of self and to join these societies and cultures to get confirmation for your experiences. It's not okay to have one experience or two experiences have you associate to one of these cultures in a way that you can't grow when you have new experiences, because now you don't have anybody to talk to, and you don't want to leave the culture that you found because it made you feel at home and it gave you comfort, but you're no longer experiencing that reality anymore. You're scared to shift to something new because you're now worried about not being able to jump to the new thing or whatever it may be. Like, you're not, some people with jobs have this, like, I don't want to go to the new job because now I don't know if I'm going to like the people there, if I'm going to like my manager or whatever, or I don't want to go to a new state, or I don't want to start a business or whatever it may be. A lot of times, once a person finds that comfort initially, creating the habit to separate from it for the sake of growth becomes a struggle for some.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Jung's idea of over identification with the persona, and you know when you get the call to leave a place of comfort, it makes sense why many people ignore that call, right? It's you're already you are already in a social and psychological structure of meaning. You already know what to do. The You've adopted the value hierarchies of the people around you, and then other people reinforce that value hierarchy, and so you know how to act, you know how to think. You don't have to contend with a state of meaninglessness, which is what you have to go through if you are going to change, if you're going to switch to a new culture or a new group. But I suppose this is what philosophy, in some sense, and psychology, and what people have been trying to persuade others to do is that, well, no, let me not say that. I think that there are some scenarios where the environment doesn't change around you too fast, and so you can't afford to keep yourself within a limited cultural hierarchy, and for many people, I've been thinking about why people hold on to their beliefs, whether they're political or they're cultural or they're religious. And I think one of the reasons that people can hold on to their beliefs, their values, is that nothing has pushed them to have to change their values. Nothing. It seems that it's only when your map is proven wrong, right? It's only when you encounter a problem or when a conflict arises that's substantial enough that requires you to rethink your values that you then are required to rethink your values. But if you're going if you're navigating in an environment that is relatively stable socially and physically, then why would you update your map? So I can kind of have some sympathy for people who don't, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to get out a little early today, man. I had to cut off soon, but I want to make this point and let you make a point, and then we'll probably go ahead and do another one this week because I really want to finish the conversation. But I just know I got to move around. I got to go pick up this couch. But what I will say is, um, I just had a point. Tell me where you just left off right quick. I feel like I just had a point and I lost it saying that.
Conflict drives growth.
Yes. Okay, that was what I was gonna say. So yeah, the idea that um I realized this. This is why I believe that there's a difference between helping and hindering someone. When someone is ready for help, they will find help. But somebody who is looking to be helped but not willing to do the work, they will allow you to hinder them. What do I mean by that? That you can't help someone until they're frustrated enough with their actions themselves to make the change. You can give the advice, but they have to be tired enough of what cycle they're in before they get ready to make a change. And so that's why growth takes a long time, is because it takes a certain level of personal frustration with the situation to actually take the action needed to change it. And so that's the critical mass there, is that you have to be mad enough. You have to really be over your old self before you're willing to make those changes. That's something I realize. I'm real hard headed, bro. I learned that the hard way. Like, it's a lot of habits I should have been kicked, but I just ain't kicked them yet because I'm not mad enough. And I began to give myself grace with that though. Like, if you was mad enough, you'll change it. You ain't mad enough. You wouldn't still you can't get a flat tire so many times and not have a four-way and a jack in your car and just want to sit and wait for AAA. Like, you're gonna get tired of that eventually. You're gonna make a different choice. You're gonna be prepared. You're gonna get the tools you need. And once you get there, it happens. And so I tell people, give people empathy and grace, because we're all on a journey, and some of us just ain't tired enough yet.
I don't think I can come up with a better closing than that. So great conversation. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm excited to keep it going.
Yeah, let's build into some of these personal examples and social hierarchies. Let's have a little bit of like you said, you speaking from the marriage. I'm what they call a common law married
Mm-hmm.
at this point. But yeah, so we'll get into that and just figuring out how this plays out in different spaces and how we can grow the conversation, brother. I appreciate your time.
Sounds good.